Hello everyone, welcome to part 1 of my LXS tutorial. This will cover roughly 10 cases, and we'll cover cases where the DFR corner is facing up and the DR edge is either at the front right or at the up front or at the up left. There will be about 9 or 10 algs per video, so for a total of 12 videos if you do not count video 0, which was the last video where I went over some finger tricks that are somewhat uncommon in 3x3 solving, which I use for LXS. For each case, I'll be doing the algorithm quickly, and then I'll show you how I finger trick it, as well as some alternative ways that you can finger tricks either some parts of the algorithm, usually 1 or 2 moves. If it's any more than that, I'll probably split it into a separate section as an alternative finger trick. And then if there's multiple good algs for a case, then I'll state the advantages of using one alg over another. That aside, I believe it is time for us to get into our LXS cases. Okay, so for the first case, it is the up front right corner with the DR edge at up front and the FR edge at up left. So this is done from a U2 AUF, and we're going to do R, pinch U, R2 prime, U prime, R prime, backflick U, R. This is what I find to be the fastest execution. There's actually a second execution that's just as fast, but what separates this from that is that you have to do an initial regrip for the other execution of this alg. When you do R, you can pinch like I just did, or you can push this U. I am more comfortable pinching here than pushing, but they're both good. And then U2 prime, R prime U, and you can push this U instead of doing a backflick as well. Both are viable options. Intuitively, the main upside of doing this alg compared to the next one I'm going to be showing is that you can start in home grip. The downside is that you do have to use some more advanced finger tricks, and positioning your hands like this can be a bit awkward for some people. In particular, when it comes to advanced finger tricks, you need to do a backflick like that. But otherwise, also when you're doing this backflick in the U and your hands in this position or this position, sometimes your fingers can get in the way, so it's easier to mess up. But it is the best execution since you start in home grip and it's just as fast as the other alg. Intuitively, the way you can think about the way this alg is executed is first we have this FR edge and then we have this pair here, so we're going to pair up those two to make a square, and then we insert the square, and finally we insert the pair back into the back. Up next, I'll show you the alternative execution, which is much easier, requires less difficult finger tricks, and is also as fast, but you start with an initial regrip. Okay, so for the second execution, what we're going to do is we're going to start with an initial regrip, and we do R, and we do U, R2 with a rolling R so that your hand doesn't end up like this, so you have to roll one of the R's, and your index finger should be down here in preparation for a move later. And then we do a U prime, R prime, U, R. Okay, so the advantages of this alg is it's compared to the previous one is it's much easier to finger trick, it's just as fast, and it's easier to avoid messing up on. Of course, you do have the initial regrip, and both algs don't end in home grip, but if you're going to be doing ZBLL, which you'll probably do eventually if you really like the method, then the ending regrip should matter a bit less since ZBL recognition is not super fast usually. So, yeah, that's the main way you can finger trick it from this angle. And up next, I'll show you an alternative alg that can be done from a different AUF, which is about the same speed as well. Okay, so this alg is done from this AUF, which is a UAUF, and what you're going to do is you're going to regrip down here, and with this right index, after doing an R, with this right ring finger, you're going to do a D prime and R, and at the same time you're going to do a U with the index. Then you do R, push U, R prime, then D prime with the D with the left hand, and then an R prime. Compared to the previous alg, it's not my favorite since it uses D moves and the other are 2-gen, but it is just as fast. And if you get it from this AUF, you should probably use this instead if you're into using multiple algs from different AUFs. So R, UD, R, push U. Once again, I don't like backflick when I'm using D moves. R prime, D, R prime. And as for how this is intuitively, how this is done intuitively, so you start by hiding this pair in the back under here, and then you're going to, at the same time, you're going to align this with a U, and then you're going to make a square with this, with RU R prime to make a square. And finally, you're going to realign the back pair to make the block and R prime. Next, we have our following LXS case. Okay, so for the next LXS case, we're doing up front right corner with the DR edge at up front and the FR edge at up back. This is done from a UAUF for the main alg. And what I do is I regrip with my thumb on bottom, and I do R, and I do a super U2, then I do an R2 with the right hand, and then I use middle finger for the U prime, R prime, U, R. This is what I consider to be the fastest execution of this alg. But there are a few other ways that you can do it, particularly for the U2. So after doing the R, you can do the U2 with the right hand, which I don't like as much since I think it's a little slower. But if you're really fast at this instead of this, then you can do it this way instead. You can also do just a regular U2 with the left hand, and then overload one of your fingers to do the U prime. I don't like overloading my fingers if I can avoid it, so I don't do that execution. And if you want to do the fastest execution, you can learn this finger trick. But both this U2 and this U2 followed by an overload are also viable alternatives for this execution. Intuitively, this alg is actually basically the same thing as the previous alg. What you're doing is you're pairing up this edge with this pair, so RU2, and then you're inserting this edge, this square right here, and then finally you're inserting the pair. Yeah, up next, this is the only actual good alg for this case, but there's a second execution which you can use of the same alg, and I'll be showing that next. Okay, for the second execution, what you're going to do is you're going to do an R, and then you're going to do U2 with the left hand, and R2 prime, and you overload one of your fingers to do U prime, and then an R prime, backflick U, R. Compared to, if you take a look at the previous case, I had a similar pair of algorithms for it, and I liked the algorithm that was more similar to the second execution for that one, but for this case, I like what I put as the first execution for this case better than this execution, and that's mainly due to the fact that although they're the same speed, combined with the fact that you have to overload your fingers this time, while in the previous case you didn't, and you are only saving the initial regrip, which can be done during AUF, and it's less consistent. I do like the other execution better because of that. However, this execution is basically the same speed, so if you prefer it, you can do this instead. That aside, we can get into our next LXS case. Okay, so for this LXS case, it's up front right corner with the DR edge at up front and the FR edge at up right. We do this from a U prime AUF for the main alg, and we're going to start with a regrip, and we do an R, U, R, U prime, R2, middle finger U prime, R2, back flick U, R2. You can finger trick it slightly differently. So if we set up the case again, R, U prime, R2, U prime all the same, R2, and then you can pinch this U instead of doing a back flick if you'd like. I'm used to doing both, and they're about the same speed. So you can pick whichever of the two executions you like. As for algs, this is the best alg for this case, so you should use this one in doubt. Intuitively, the way that this alg works is you're going to actually do a line insert. So if you are familiar, we do start with an RU, and that makes this line with this green edge and that blue edge, and then an RU prime, and that makes this line thing where you have the same color here and opposite colors here. And then finally R2 U prime, and this sets up this pair to be connected to this corner here, and R2 U, R2 completes the line, and then you push in the line and you go down. So that's how you do that case. That's intuitively what's happening at that case. Up next, I will show you a different AUF trick that you can use from a specific AUF of this case. The alg is not as fast as this main alg, but if you get that AUF and get an AUF skip, you might consider using that alg instead. Okay, so when you get the AUF from this angle for this LXS case, there is another alg you can use, and that is R, U, R prime, U prime, R prime, U prime, R, U, R2, U, R prime. There's a couple ways you can note the finger tricks. So first of all, I do the pinch U here because you might be able to push, but doing a sexy like this rather than a pinch is a bit weird to me, but if you're better at doing it that way, you can do that. But basically you start off with the sexy, and then after R prime, U prime, R, U, R2, you can push this instead of doing a back flick. I mentioned I like back flicks, so I do back flicks here, but you can push instead. Something to note about this case is at an intuitive level, after you do the sexy, you're just setting up to this different LXS case, and the LXS case is pretty good, and you just solve it with R prime, U prime, R2, U, R prime, I believe. What's the alg? But yeah, this is just a case where you're setting up to a next LXS case. It's a bit slower, mainly it's more moves, and also when you get to the R prime, U prime, R prime, U prime, that can feel a bit weird on the fingers, but if you get used to that, it's actually quite fast to execute. But yeah, that is all for this case. It is a bit slower than the main one, so use the main one if you get any AUF except this one, but this is a good AUF trick. Up next will be our next LXS case. Okay, so for this LXS case, we have the up front right corner with the DR edge up front and the FR edge solved. So this is done from a U to AUF, and what you're going to do is you're going to start by regripping like this, and you do an R, and then a D prime, and then an R, push U, R prime, D, R. Oh, R. Yeah, R prime. Sorry, yeah. But anyway, so this alg is the best alg for this case. There are two other algs that you can use as AUF tricks, but it's unclear how worth they are to learn, especially the one from this angle. This angle might be a good AUF trick, a better AUF trick than this one, but they're both good. Intuitively, what you're doing is you're going to be hiding this corner here, this pair here with R, D prime, and then you're going to pair this pair and this edge up to make a square, and then after moving the square here, when you do the D move, it'll pair up this pair and the square so that you can insert it well. So I'm going to show you the two algs that can be used as AUF tricks for this LXS case. Okay, so for this LXS case, when you have this AUF, which is a U2 away from the previous case, what you can do is from home grip, R prime, U prime, R, U, and R2, U2, R prime, U, R, U prime, R prime. Okay, so as an alg, this alg is actually pretty fast. It's just not as fast as the one with chooses D moves. Because that one's really short and fast. But if you get it from this AUF, you might want to consider using this alg. Intuitively, what this alg is doing is you start by inserting this dr edge with the normal dr insert, which is r prime, u prime, r, u, r. And that inserts the dr edge. It's a LXS case coming up in a later video, but that is the standard insert for beginner dr insert. Unless you want to do it with an S move from here. But anyway, now you solve this F12 case. So that's an R, U2, R prime, U, R, U prime, R prime. Like so. Up next is a third alg that can be used as another AUF trick for this case. And yeah. Okay, so for this AUF, you can do a different alg, and you're going to start with the regrip, and you do an R2, then you do a U prime, and you do an R2 prime, and you do a U prime with the middle finger, and you do an R2, and you could do a back flick U, and then R2 prime. There's a few ways you can finger trick that last U. If we set it up again, after R2 U, R2 U prime, R2, you can also pinch this U to make the thing. Instead of doing a back flick, you can pinch like this. Either way works. Yeah, this alg is also slower than the D move alg, and it's only one AUF away. So it's unclear if how worth this alg is, but it is also quite fast. And if you get it from this AUF, you might want to consider using this alg. That'll depend on how fast we find these algs to be. At an intuitive level, the way this alg works is I believe it makes a line R2 U prime. So that sets up this line case where you have the middle line here, and then you have these matching and these opposite. And R2 U prime moves this out of the way so that you can pair it up with this corner piece, and then R2 U does a line insert in R2 prime. Yep. Up next we have our last LXS case where we have like the pair in the top with the up front right corner. Okay, so for this LXS case, we have the up front right corner and the DR edge at up front, and the FR edge is in the DR slot. So this is done from a UAUF, and we're going to do a slight regrip with our thumb on top, and do R prime U2, R with a rolling R, and then a U2 with the left hand, and then an R like this. This alg is the fastest execution of the alg, although you do have a slight regrip at the start. Yeah, it's really fast. It's also the only good alg, but if you want to do the alg from home grip, you can instead do it like this. R prime, U2, R, U2, R. And comparatively, it's a bit slower. But maybe that's just because I'm really bad at this, but the other way just seems much faster. But if you think that this way is faster and you can do it faster than me, then go ahead and use this method. But the other way is just the main way I execute it is just really fast. Intuitively, the way that you can think about what this case is doing is you're just pairing up this edge with this pair to make a square, like so, and then finally you're pairing up this pair with this edge and center to finish the block, and then you insert the block. Next we have our upcoming LXS case, the first where we do not have a pair made. Okay, so for this LXS case, we have the up front right corner, and the DR edge is at the up left. The FR edge is at FR edge is at the up front. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do an R prime, U prime, R, U prime, R, U2 super like that, and R. There's actually like 4 ways to finger trick this specific alg, and that was just one way that you could do it. So the first thing that you can do is instead of doing a U prime and then a U prime like that, you can do U prime and then you can push the second U like that. So what that's going to look like is you're going to do an R prime, U prime, R, and then instead of doing U prime with the middle finger, you push like this, R, U2, R, and that avoids overloading your your middle finger when you do the U2 at the end. The other way you can do it is R prime, U prime, R, back flick U, R, U2, R, and that also avoids overloading your middle finger. I'm less proficient at doing back flicks with the right hand, especially when I'm turning the R layer. So I can't show that one as fast. And lastly, of course, you can always just overload your fingers, since overloading barely loses any time. R prime, U prime, R, U prime, R, and then overload. And that last execution, which maybe loses at most 0.1 seconds or 0.01 seconds, who knows how much time it actually loses, is technically slower, but it's much easier to execute, and if you flub one of the other executions, then you definitely lost time on those. But that is this case in a nutshell. Something to note about doing the super U2 at the end is that if you get a ZBLL, which is really easy to recognize, such as ZBLL skip or T-perm from a specific angle that makes it easy to recognize, then maybe your finger will not make it back in time, but most of the time that won't happen. So most of the time recognizing ZBLL will take longer than it takes to reset the finger. So it should be okay to use this, but that is a thing to note if you want to use the advantage of using either push or back flick instead of ending like this. Up next, we have our next LXS case. Okay, so for this LXS case, what we're going to be doing is we have the up from right corner, and with the DR edge at up left, the FR edge at up back. This is done from a UF for the main alg, and we do R, U2, R2, reload one of these fingers to do a U prime, R, U, R2, U prime, R prime. Yeah, this is my favorite alg. It's pretty easy on the finger tricks. You do overload a finger, but it is still quite fast. There are 2 other algs that are coming up that can be used as well. One is from this AUF and is just as fast, and the other one's from a different AUF and also just as fast. So whichever of these algs you like, pick your favorite. This is my favorite. Intuitively, the way this alg works is you start by making this pair. So you do R, U2, and then we do an R prime, and then we solve this case. And this LXS case is solved by doing a standard DR insert, so R prime, U prime, R, U, R, and then we end up inserting this pair afterwards. Up next is a second alg that can be used for this LXS case from the same AUF. Okay, so for the second execution, what we're going to do is from the same AUF as before, we do R, U2, R prime, back flick U like this, and then S, R2, S prime, R2, middle finger U prime, R prime. So compared to the first execution, this is just as fast. The main difficulty with this is that if you're not precise, especially with the back flick U right before doing the S, it is very easy to lock up on the S moves, and that's the main reason why it's not my main alg, but it is very fast to execute. Let's see. The way you can intuitively think about it is, let's set up the case again. Okay, so the way you can intuitively think about it is first we pair up this, R, U2, R prime, and instead of inserting the edge like in that case, we insert it from here with S, R2, S prime, R2, or R3 actually, and we do a U prime and then an R prime. Something to note is that from this case, you probably could do an S, R2, S like that, and then do a U prime like that. I find that a bit less comfortable, but maybe if you're very familiar with doing S, R2, S prime, R2 like that, then you can save on doing an R3 by doing an R prime instead. Yeah, that's all I have to say about this. It's a bit harder to finger trick, but it is just as fast as the previous case, and if you like S moves, this alg might be for you. Up next is another alg, which is also just as fast, but from a different AUF. So if you want to AF trick this case, you might want to learn one of these first two algs and then that third one, or you can just learn any of these algs you like. Okay, so for this case, if you get this LXS case from this alg, you can instead use the following algorithm. So you do R prime, U2, and R2, pinch U, R prime, U, R2, backflick U, R prime. There's actually a lot of ways to trick this. Most of the time, it involves replacing this with a push move soon. So the way what that would look is, so if you do R prime U2, R2, you can do a push like that. And then after this, you can also do a push here. Basically, for the, yeah, you can replace either of them with a push. If you want to use no pushes, I recommend doing the soon like this, and then doing the back flick like that, since it's kind of hard to do 2 back flicks in a row. It's kind of slow to do that. But if you're doing a push for either of them, then you can either finger trick the other one with like R2U, R prime U, or you can finger trick them R2U, R prime U. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. A few examples. You could do R prime U2, R2U, R prime U, R2 U prime, R prime, U R prime like that, or you could do R prime U2, R2U, R prime U, R2U, R prime U like that. Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can finger trick it, but the main ways involve doing like either a push U or this kind of soon followed by like a back flick. Intuitively, the way this case works is you use black magic and it ends up solved. So what I mean by that is you do R prime U2, nothing pairs up, nothing looks like it's getting close to pairing up, and then you do an R2 U R prime, and finally you've paired up this pair with that DR edge. But there's been a lot that you've done, mostly like these extra long soons, but by pairing it up this way, you get a free pair. Anyway, don't think about this alg too much from an intuitive level. It's black magic. It's not the only black magic we'll be seeing in this LXS series. Yeah. Up next is our next LXS case. Okay, so for this LXS case, the main alg I like to use is S, R2, S prime, R3, U prime, R prime, U2, R, backflick U, R prime. Yeah, so for this case, the compared to the previous case where I mentioned that the S was a bit difficult to do, it's because you did it right after a back flick, and sometimes if you mess up the alignment on the back flick, you can have lock up with the S, R2, S prime, R2 sequence a bit more easily. This one, you still can lock up by doing that, but it's a bit less likely because you're just starting the alg with that, and it's right after AUF, which is usually not going to be a back flick, or you might align a bit better. In either case, you're going to, yeah, there's another alg. There are actually two other algs that are just as fast, and one of the others is done from this AUF. So if you really don't like to do the S moves, or you think you'll mess it up too easily, you can always use the next alg. As for how this is done, some other finger tricks that you can use for this case after like this. Oh, I should mention that you can do S, R2, S prime, R prime, U prime like that to get to this scenario and then finish it off the same. I'm not as comfortable doing that because I feel like I have less grip on the cube, but if you are very good at that, that might be a faster way to do the S, R2, S prime, R prime for this case. Going back to here, some notes for alternative finger tricks. Right here, you can push this in or you can pinch this in. I like to backflick because it's my favorite. I like it more than pinch even, but you can use whichever you're comfortable with. As for intuition on how this alg works, you just basically you're just inserting this edge with the S R2 S prime R2, and so that inserts the edge, and then you get this F12 case. Normally you solve it with a different alg from this angle, but since you have to do a U2 AUF, you just do an R U prime R prime U2 R U R prime to solve the F12 case. But it is basically just a DR insert into an F12. Up next, I'll be showing an alternative alg from the same angle, which you can use, which is RU gen, and it's just as fast. I feel like it's a tiny bit slower, like tiny bit, but that's just me, and it's negligible. This DP difference, if existent, is negligible anyway. Okay, so for this execution, what we're going to do is from home group R U prime, R2 prime, U prime, R, U, rolling R, U2 prime, R, backflick U, R prime. This is just as fast as the previous alg, and it's 2 gen. I do like the other alg slightly better. I feel like it flows a bit better, but this is a very good alternative that you might want to use. And it also, it does use a backflick, but you can probably pinch it in at the end instead. So as for alternative finger tricks, R U prime, R2 U prime, R U, R U2 prime, like this. You can pinch this in. You could push it in with the middle finger since you just did a U2 prime, but I'd probably take pinch or back flick. Either way, that's how you'd execute that case. At an intuitive level, what this case is doing, R U prime, R2 U prime. You just insert the edge with a few extra moves and you set up to this pair. So there's not too much going on that's special. But yeah, you set up the pair to a free pair and you insert the DR edge with R prime, U prime, R, U, R. So it's somewhere in between intuitive and black magic. Anyway, yeah, up next is the third alg, which can be done from a different AUF and is also just as fast, but it is very difficult to finger trick and get used to properly. But yeah, I'll be showcasing that. Okay, so if you get the LXS case from this alg, this following alg is very fast to do it and is probably the best alg from this angle. What you're going to do is you're going to do an F. After a regrip, you're going to do an F, R, wide F, R, U, R prime, push S like this, R prime, U R prime. Okay, the thing that makes this alg tricky to finger trick is that as you're doing an R prime, you're doing a push S, and that can be a bit difficult to get used to, but it is definitely very fast. The overall TPS of this alg is a bit lower than the others, but it is a shorter alg, so that is something worth noting. If you want some intuition on how this alg works, I guess somehow you pair this up, and that magically, it's black magic. It's black magic. Use wide F and S, so it's black magic. But yeah, that is an alg from this angle. It is short. That's about all I have to say for that alg. Those are pretty much the only good finger tricks for it as well, because yeah, your fingers are all busy doing something strange, either doing pinch U or push S. There's no other ways to finger trick that, and you do have an initial regrip, so that is something to keep in mind, but it is a very fast alg for that angle. And if you really want to, you could also make it your main alg for this case. Okay, so if you get this case from this angle, there's another alg you can use as an AUF trick. It is very similar to the first alg, except this time the edge is here, so you do S prime U2 S, and that inserts the edge, and you get this same F12 case as from the first time, and then you just insert that, similar to the first alg for this case. I do not like doing S like this as much as this, but it's better to do it than the main alg if you get it from this AUF. But the intuition is pretty similar to the first alg. You're just doing an S prime U2 S instead of a S R2 S prime R2. But since S prime U2 S is a bit more annoying to do, I would mark it as a slightly worse alg. Of course, if you really think that S prime U2 S is better than S R2 prime S prime R2, you might want to use this alg instead. But that is how you can solve this LXS case from 3 different angles. So next we have the next LXS case. Okay, so for this LXS case, we have the up front right corner here, and we have the DR edge at the up left, and we have the FR edge solved. So the alg we're going to use is we're going to start with an initial regrip. We do R2, U prime, R2, U2 prime, so you reload your index finger, and then R2, U, pinch, R2 prime. Or you could back flick that last U. But like this. This alg is the fastest alg for this case. There is another alg which you can use as an AUF trick from this angle, but this should be your main alg. It's quite fast. Intuitively, it uses a line insert, so you do R2 U prime, and that sets up this line case with this green and blue red edge, and then you have this red, and these are opposites. And R2 U2 to set it up to this case, and then you just insert it with line, which I've shown in several previous algs. Yeah, nothing too fancy. You just have some R2s and U2 primes. It's actually quite similar to one of the alternative algs for this LXS case from this angle. It's just like instead of a U prime, you do a U2 for this case. So, but yeah, this case is pretty fast. And up next I'll show the alg from this angle. Okay, so for this LXS case, if you get it from this angle, you can always do this other alg, and it goes R prime, U prime, R, U, R2, backflick U, R prime, U prime, R, U prime, R prime. That's my favorite execution of it. It is a bit tricky to do it this way, mainly because you do like a ping pong between your two fingers on the left hand. That can be a bit difficult to get used to, but it is also a pretty fast execution. If you want to do it differently, however, you can always do R prime, U prime, R, U, R2, U, push U, R prime, U, and you could pitch this in. Or if you did the first one with the back flick, you could push this in. So there's a few ways that you can finger trick this alg, but my favorite is to ping pong the U layer between my index and middle finger. That said, this alg is difficult to finger trick. It is slower, so you just use this alg as your main alg, and if you want to AUF trick, this is what you can use as an AUF trick. That was not the alg. Anyway, whatever the case, next up we have our final LXS case of the video. Okay, so for this LXS case, we have the up front right corner here, and we have the DR edge at up left, and we have the FR edge at DR. And what we're going to do is we're going to do inverse sexy R U prime R prime U, and we're going to do an R U prime R prime, and this actually sets it to the standard DR insert LXS case R prime U prime R U R. Yeah, for this case, basically you're doing some moves to set at an intuitive level. You're just doing some moves R U prime R prime U R U prime R prime, some intuitive moves to set this up to this case, and then you do the standard insert to solve everything. This is the only really good alg for this case. I was going to show a second alg which used D moves, but it's from the same AUF, and it's just slower in general, and it's harder to finger trick, so I'm not going to include it here. It is only slightly slower though, so if you want to use the transient batch solver to figure out which alg that is, be my guest. Anyway, that's pretty much the only good way to finger trick it. R U prime R prime U, R U prime R2 U prime R U R. But all the finger tricks are simple. You're not doing anything fancy. And that is how you solve the ULDR LXS case. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found a new favorite LXS alg, or at least enjoyed seeing what other options I gave for most of these cases. And I will see you in the next video where I'll cover the next 10 cases. Have a nice day.